Howdy, everyone. This episode is brought to you by Fireblocks. Love this company. You'll be hearing all about them from me later in the episode. But now, on with the show. All right, everybody. Welcome to the weekly roundup edition of On the Margin. Today, my co-host and I, Mark, are joined by a special guest, Mr. Brent Johnson, by popular request. Brent, Mark, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting
me. No adjective this morning, though, Michael. I'm crushed.
I'm sorry, adjective. Mark. I got thrown. There were two people. I didn't prepare two adjectives, and I didn't want to leave Brent out.
It's all right. No, but we could use intrepid for Brent now that he has relocated to PR and he's got that beautiful map behind him. And since we're not going to talk about crypto today very much, I'm going to do the sock reveal very quickly. So
Brent
we have
the
Bitcoin
this was coming.
roller coaster on.
Wow.
And it's because, the thing about a roller coaster, it's not so much about the ups and downs. It's about remembering that when you finish the ride, you're in exactly the same place. So for the last month and the last 2 months, we are in exactly the same place. Lots of ups and downs. We're in the same place. So,
Brent, if you didn't know, this is our version of Punxsutawney Phil, and the market watches for Mark's sock reveal to see what Bitcoin is going to do. So we made it happen. So
I do have the Bitcoin orange bull market pants on, though, so that's good.
Okay.
So we're still in crypto winter, but we could be starting a bull market. We'll see.
Here's what I do want to talk about today. So I want to get, we're having Brent on the show because Mark and I kind of touched on the dollar milkshake theory in last week's roundup. We may have gotten it a little bit wrong, so we wanted to bring the guy who actually, pioneered the theory on the show to explain it, give us an update, etc. And that will kind of lead us into what I really want to cover with the two of you, which is this idea of the closing of the foreign exchange window. Great interview, by the way, with Luke Groman and Grant Williams came out last week. Everyone should go listen to that. But before we get into that, Brent, I'm sure, you've been on the show multiple times. I know folks are familiar with you at this point, but even just super quick background, and then if you could outline, the dollar milkshake theory for us.
Sure. So Brent Johnson, I have a wealth management firm called Santiago Capital, where I do customized, separately managed accounts for about 15 different very high net worth clients. And then we have a small private fund that we manage as well, where we do some asymmetric trades to kind of take advantage of some of the potential things that could happen in the years ahead about the stuff we're probably going to talk about today. The dollar milkshake theory is basically my view of how a sovereign debt crisis would play out. And I started talking about this back in 2018, 2019. So now we're 3-4 years into it and it hasn't happened yet. And so, on Wall Street, a lot of people will say, if you don't get the timing right, then you're wrong. So if that's the case, then I will admit I got the timing wrong and it hasn't played out yet. That doesn't mean it won't play out. And I still think it will play out. But it's amazing the ability for politicians, central bankers, monetary authorities, however you want to describe them, to kick this can down the road. And the theory basically says that, yes, the world is trying to de-dollarize, but they have not de-dollarized. And I believe it is too little, too late. The efforts that they are making is too little, too late. And when the sovereign debt crisis kicks off, I think that the dollar will still be the flight to safety trade, despite the fact that everybody hates it, despite the fact that everybody wants to get out from underneath it, despite the fact that, the U.S. is a bully and all this other stuff. They print. And, I don't disagree with any of those points that people make with regards to the potential negative future of the dollar. I just happen to think that the chapter before the chapter where it dies, it goes much, much higher. And we can kind of talk about that stuff today. But essentially, the theory is that all the central banks around the world have flooded the markets with liquidity. But when the sovereign debt crisis kicks off, that liquidity will get forced either willingly or unwillingly into the dollar. And the dollar will go much higher versus other currencies. And that has a number of knock-on effects for capital markets.
So why milkshake?
So it kind of goes back to this movie, There Will Be Blood.
Yes.
And I remember I was watching that movie and I was like, that's a pretty good analogy. That's a pretty good way to explain it. And part of it is that it kind of helps understand what I do, why I explain it in that way, is that I work with individuals. And most of the individuals I work with are very smart, extremely successful, but they're not necessarily finance guys. You can't really necessarily talk about yield curves and, OAS spreads and all that kind of stuff because their eyes just glaze over. And the reason they hired me is they don't want to talk about that stuff anyway. They want me to take care of it for them. So when I am talking to them about some of this more complicated stuff, I have to figure out kind of a more simple analogy to explain them what I think is going to happen and why we should do what we're going to do. And the best way that I could explain what I thought was happening, kind of the 2015 to 2018 time frame was that the world was just being flooded with liquidity. But then I felt like the U.S. at the time was raising rates and nobody else was. And so I referred to that as the straw. Like we were raising rates, everybody else was pushing rates down. So we were sucking up that liquidity that the whole world is mixing. And the point I made was that it doesn't really matter who prints the money. What matters is who captures the money. And so I think for several reasons, and I used interest rates as an analogy for the straw. We had higher relative rates than other sovereigns. And so we were sucking that capital up into the dollar. And I said that would cause a lot of problems, which it did. But to be clear, the higher relative interest rates is not the only factor in the straw. There's more to the straw than just interest rates. Interest rates is a huge part of it, but there's more to it also. It's just the legacy system of the dollar, the fact that there's so much dollar debt out there in the world, not just owed by the United States. Like there's more dollar debt outside the world, outside the United States that's owed than is inside the United States that is owed. So there's huge demand for the dollar. Outside the United States. There's huge demand to service that debt. There's huge demand just to do trade, whether you're trading oil or gold or commodities or soybeans or cars or whatever it is. Most international invoices are invoiced in dollars or they're priced in dollars. And then, the other thing that I talk about a lot of people don't like it when I use this particular point, but the fact is we're still the global superpower and we have the world's biggest military. And, we have enforced the dollar standard on the rest of the world for a long time now. And I don't think that we will ever give that up willingly, whether it's to our benefit to do so or not. I don't think that the global reserve currency is something that is just given away. I think it has to be taken.
No, I totally agree. It's perfect. Yeah. You got the map with the ships behind you because it isn't given away. It's taken away. That's right. And the dollar world reserve currency status is being taken away as we speak, as we sit here, right? As we're talking, it's happening in China, in Russia, in smaller countries all around the world. And it's because I believe that the next transition will be because the next war, which we're experiencing right now, it can be fought with ships. It's going to be fought with chips. And that's what China figured out, and that's why. And most people don't have any idea that this is true. They think Dixie's high, or higher. I mean, it's not high; it's higher than it was. It's still down a lot from a number of years ago, but it's still higher than it was. And Dixie's up, so that means the dollar's strong. No, that means the dollar is stronger than the yen and the euro, which make up like 90% of Dixie. But last year, the dollar was weaker against the renminbi. People are like, no, that's not true. Well, it is true. That is true. And it's true again this year. And it's going to be true next year. And China is playing a different game. They are playing Go while we argue about how to set up the checkerboard.
I disagree with that, but I respect that, but I disagree.
I know. If two people agree on everything, then one person is unnecessary. Right. So it's good to have dialogue and debate in search of truth. I mean, that's the whole purpose for these discussions.
Sure.
And I know you and I have disagreed on the China play and go thing for a long time on Twitter, and I love it because I want people who I respect and admire to challenge a view, and it's interesting. Well, Michael, this is not where you want to go, so I'll stop.
No.
I would actually love this. Okay, so I'm very attracted to areas where like really smart people line up on either side of the debate, and China is like at the very tippy top of that list. So let's just lay out your points. Mark, why is China playing Go? And then Brent, I want to hear the counter to that. Like, why is China not playing Go? Why is the US better positioned?
China plans in 30-year increments. They have these 30-year plans. And the last one from 1990 to 2020 was about moving from a less prosperous society to a moderately prosperous socialism society. And it was dubbed the Harmonious Rise. And what they did in that period is they moved 750 million people from abject poverty to the middle class. And they achieved the goal. It's pretty amazing, right? 750 million people, the size of US plus Europe, out of poverty into the middle class. And they became a moderately prosperous socialism economy. Everyone says, oh, they're communist. They're not communist. They have a communist politburo, but they are very capitalistic. And really what they are is socialistic in terms of, and they have cronyism too, just like the United States. But bottom line is socialism is their goal. So then they adopted 2 years ago their new 30-year plan. And the new 30-year plan is moderately different than the old 30-year plan. It's not a harmonious rise. It is to become a great socialism economy, a global superpower. And every move they make is focused on these long-term plans. They don't care about 6 months or this year or a couple years. They care about big moves. And they wanted the renminbi to become a world reserve currency. They achieved that in 2017. It was added to the SDR. They don't want to be the world reserve currency yet. I believe they do want to be the world reserve currency. And 10 years ago, the reason I really think they're playing a different game than everybody else is 10 years ago, they made a commitment, a decision to focus on being the very best in two areas, 5G and AI, and chips in kind of support of that, to move some of that expertise or dominance, not expertise, dominance from Taiwan to China. Because remember, China still believes Taiwan is part of China. Now, that's a whole nother story for another day. But bottom line is they decided to be best in that. And I always joke, America decided to be awesome at social media. We rock at Facebook and Instagram, but we're not really that good at 5G, and we're really not that good at AI. 90+% of the citations in AI last year came out of China. So I believe they are far ahead. They realize that the next war is not fought with ships. So they have one aircraft carrier and it doesn't work very well. And everybody's heard Gartman talk about, they fly their planes and they crash. Next war isn't going to be fought with aircraft carriers and tanks. It's going to be fought in cyberspace. So my view.
I don't necessarily disagree with anything that Mark has said. I think that China does think in years. I think that they do have a 30-year plan. I think one of my counters would be that I've had a 30-year plan to lose some weight and get in better shape for the last 30 years. That doesn't mean
the problem, Brent,
that doesn't mean that it happens. Let me tell you, it doesn't mean it happens.
It's a great point. The problem is you don't have the mandate from heaven.
I got the mandate from my wife, though.
I know, which is probably stronger.
That's stronger than a mandate from heaven.
But you don't have the mandate from heaven. She believes in the mandate from heaven. He believes that the Chinese people have been deemed to be at the top.
I do believe you're correct on that. I think that they do believe that. And I think that many of the people there believe that. And should that ever not happen, or should something ever happen to shatter that dream, China would have an extreme problem on their hands internally.
Totally agree. Absolutely agree.
And the other point I would make is, a counterpoint, because we could come up with 100 points of how smart they are and how strategic they are. Mm-hmm. But they weren't smart enough to figure out that they shouldn't do a one-child policy. And now they've created themselves a demographic nightmare. So who was the long-term thinker that came up with that? So again, you can have these plans, you can have these goals, but just because you write something down, just because you go work at it, doesn't mean you're going to achieve it. So I don't disagree with anything that Mark has said. I'm just not as certain that it's going to be achieved in the time frame or in the way that perhaps Mark does, or
no,
others.
Brent. I mean, again, this is why we have these conversations, because again, the perception would be, oh, you guys are in violent disagreement. No, we are disagreeing on really important points, and that is a really important point. And there's no question that the mistake 80 plus years ago of Mao, right, who went away from the mandate from heaven and went to communism, right? I mean, he believed in the Marxist, communist, equality for everybody except me. I get most, and my friends get a lot. But that was a mistake, and everybody knows it. And then there was a series of leaders that tried to bring it back, but she is the first one who has proven to be a great, in my estimation, a great leader, like serious leader who gets things done to the point of he's the type of guy that says, okay, I am actually going to go to the gym this year and I am going to make it 18 days, which if you can make it 18 days, then it's a habit.
Then it's a habit, yeah.
And he, and most people make it about 14 and a half, which is amazing, which is, just almost there.
So funny.
Tell me about it.
Almost there.
Tell me about it.
But he says there's too much corruption, right? Now you say, well, that's an oxymoron in China. Of course there's too much corruption. I mean, that's the whole point. And what does he do? Almost the day he gets in office, Bo Lai, I think is his name, gets arrested. And then a whole bunch of people get arrested. And everybody says, oh, he's just consolidating power. I'm like, yes, he is. But he also moved them beyond the old school, which, to Brent's point, those are the people that less visionary leaders said, yeah, one child policy would be more for us. Like, no, that's really stupid. So I think it comes down to leadership. And again, people don't like when I say this, but it's really easy now because so many people hate American leadership. I mean, our leadership in this country.
Well, so the point I make
there, zero. It's negative, but they have great leaders.
It's interesting you bring this up because I talk about all this stuff all the time as well. Is that I feel like in America, this is my perception, so perhaps it's wrong, but my perception is that there's a lot of people, let's call it in the West, who recognize, for lack of a better word, that the American leadership is not what it was or not what it used to be or has waned. Use whatever analogy you want. And then that automatically means that the people sitting in power in Germany and South Africa and Australia and Canada and China and Japan are these geniuses. And they're not.
Zero sum. That's a zero sum.
They're no different. Yeah, just because we're bad doesn't mean the other people are good, right? Just because we've messed up doesn't mean that they've done everything perfectly. And I feel like I get this a lot with the military topic. The U.S. hasn't won a war in 50 years. They couldn't even beat someone in the desert, and despite the trillions we spend, da 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 da. And I'm like, and they make it sound like just there's no chance that America could win a war. Like that's just an automatic given that they're going to lose. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is the biggest, most sophisticated military in the history of the world. And if you don't think that there's any chance that we can win a war, then you're just not being, objective.
This episode is brought to you by Fireblocks. I talk to a lot of fast-growing crypto-native funds, crypto banks, exchanges, and the like, and they all tell me they have the same two problems. One, their treasury management setup sucks. They've got analysts wasting time and money on manual transactions. Two, they are not happy with their current security setup. They're sharing passwords, they're sending test transactions, and they're worried that their funds might be at risk. Fireblocks is a platform that solves all of that for you. They are a one-stop shop portal which automatically plugs into exchanges, trading venues, etc. They source deep liquidity and solve everything from day-to-day crypto transactions all the way down to complex DeFi strategy. And the best thing about Fireblocks is that they offer scalable solutions with industry-leading technology. Doesn't matter if you're a 2-person crypto fund or a 2,000-person crypto exchange, these guys have you covered. And the last thing that I'll say about this company is that I have known them for years. They are a high integrity team. They ship product like no other. I would trust them with my own funds. So click the link at the bottom of this page and tell them that I sent you. Very, very important that you click the link at the bottom here. Otherwise, they're not going to know that I sent you. And then how am I going to get credit? So help a brother out. Click the link at the bottom of this episode. Tell them I sent you. Brent, the reason I love this, the milkshake theory so much is because a lot of people see, the end of U.S. dollar hegemony, right? The dollar status as the reserve currency. The idea is that, dollar is going to be monopoly money, paper towel, pick your analogy. But I do like this idea that it's actually going to get much stronger. So when you're looking at what the Fed is faced with right now, right, we're staring down the barrel of, what last month's CPI print came in at 7.9%. It actually looks probably the war in Ukraine is actually going to exacerbate things in general. That might actually make the Fed hike rates. Whether they actually want to fight inflation or they want to put on a show fighting inflation, rates will go up. And honestly, when rates go up, that attracts capital and that tends to strengthen the dollar. So I guess my question to you is if we're moving into an inflationary environment that is more persistent than the monetary authorities would like, they actually might be more hawkish and surprised to the more hawkish side of rate increases. And that might do you see that as playing into, the dollar milkshake theory and actually strengthening the dollar, which is a problem in its own way for the world's economy?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's literally part of the theory is that the U.S. would weaponize the dollar. Now, we've already seen them do it in a big way. And so let's just, before, I'll get to that point, but since we're talking about the weaponization of the dollar, let's talk about what they've done over the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because I think this is another point that I like to make out. First of all, a year ago, the unanimous decision across basically every market participant was that the government would never stop sending checks and the Fed would never, ever raise rates. But the point I want to make is most people didn't even foresee that as a possibility. It was a certainty that neither of those things would ever happen, but it happened. So the point is nothing is ever certain. Crazy things happen. Certainty is death in investments. That's what I would say. Certainty is death.
Oh, I love it. That's a new hashtag.
Yeah. Now, if we continue to raise rates to weaponize the dollar, it would hurt the United States. I'm not going to pretend that there wouldn't be some blowback, but it wouldn't just hurt the United States, right? When the UK raises rates, they're raising rates on the UK. When Australia raises rates, they're raising rates on Australia. When the US raises rates, they're raising rates on the whole world because the whole world uses dollars, borrows in dollars, and needs dollars. So the analogy that's been used before is the going to the mattresses from The Godfather, right? That's where it's just a war where everybody knows that every side is going to take heat, going to get hurt, people are going to die. But the goal is just to outlast the other guy, right? And I kind of feel like the next war, whatever you want to call it, whether it's fought with chips or ships or dollars or currencies or whatever it is, everybody's going to get hurt. Nobody's going to get out of this unscathed. And I think that's something with regard to my milkshake theory that people don't get is they either think that I think that the U.S. is going to come out of this smelling like roses and the rest of the world's going to be a heap of ashes. That's not the case. In the milkshake theory, the United States suffers greatly. It's just that we suffer less initially, and we do a little better than everybody else in the middle, and then at the end, we're all dead. And so, I do think that the point that Mike was asking me earlier before we came on is, are we on this dollar standard now, and did they just shut the dollar window? I don't think that they necessarily shut it yet, but they showed that it can be shut. And I think that bodes two things. One is that they will probably do it again. Whether it's smart to do it again or not, they will probably do it again. It's a weapon that they have. It will probably be used. The second thing is that it works, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't think that shutting the dollar window has hurt Russia, whose currency is down 40 or 50%, whose stock market is down at 80% and closed, where ships will not unload goods or pick up goods, if people think that this is all a mirage and that Russia is really not hurting, they're fooling themselves. It is hurting Russia. Now, Is there going to be blowback in the form of higher energy prices, higher commodity prices, other knock-on effects we haven't even thought of? Of course, the U.S. is not going to come out of this unscathed. But I think the dollar will be weaponized, and one way that they can weaponize it, whether they will or not, I don't know, but one way they can weaponize it is raising rates. The other thing that they can do is, going back to the shutting the dollar window, they can use swap lines. Certain countries who kind of agree with us and help us and align with us, they get a dollar swap line and they get better liquidity. But if you're on the other side and you don't, agree with us and you don't support us, well, you don't get a dollar swap line. And so I think that is a battle that's going to take place. And the point that people will then say to me, well, then Brent, if China and Russia and Pakistan and Iran and Saudi Arabia, if they go and they just use, yuan or rubles or whatever it is, Bitcoin, whatever it is, they start using that for trade, that's fine. I agree that that's a possibility. I think it's a low probability, but it is a possibility. But if they did that, that means dollar liquidity is now slower and lower than it was before. But all that dollar debt still exists. And so unless you're going, if you have lower liquidity, and you still have demand from all the debt, the dollar probably rises. Now, you'll say, but there's demand destruction for the dollar as well because they don't need it to trade anymore. Okay, that's true. But if that dollar debt starts to get defaulted on, then you get a credit contraction. And the dollar supply doesn't just stay steady, it starts to crater. I mean, that's why they would have to do QE, to Mark's point, one and done, right? If credit starts to contract, the U.S. will have to come back in and provide liquidity. But maybe they will only provide it to the people or the countries or the corporations that they are aligned with. And then I think that's when other countries and other corporations are going to have to make a choice. Who do we want to do business with, the United States, or do we want to do business with China? And I do think that's where we're headed.
Brent's right. They are definitely going to be hurt by the weaponization of the dollar and the seizure of their assets, their central bank assets. But the short-sightedness of those moves, I mean, Russia is crushing it in gas revenues, now in oil revenues, because those prices have skyrocketed. And guess what? 30% of Europe's gas is still coming from Russia, and they're still getting paid. Yeah. And everybody's like, no, they're sanctions. No. They are getting paid. And the America's not going to import Russian oil. Who gives a crap? It's 1 million barrels. Russia doesn't give a crap about that. They just signed a massive deal with China, right? Visa and MasterCard just shut down the operations in Russia. Most people have no idea that Visa and MasterCard are not the largest payment processors in the world anymore. It's the Chinese.
What's the Chinese one? It's called GoPay or something like that?
Brent, I just went right out of my head. No but problem. They have 24%, and Visa and MasterCard have 21 and 27. Yeah. But it's people just don't comprehend how this China plan, this reinvention of the Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, is migrating up, and it's like Greece. Right? Yeah. Who owns all the strategic ports in Greece now? China. Yeah. And I'm not saying they're really, really important, but people forget that it is the geographical navel of the world, literally. And
one point I want to make on this before we jump to a different topic is again, perhaps Twitter and perhaps the podcast universe and perhaps the online chat forums are not the whole view of the whole world. So perhaps
what?
Perhaps there are
heresy.
Perhaps there are a few opinions outside there, but I think part of the zeitgeist out there is that by the U.S. doing this, they've forced the rest of the world to align with China and Russia, and the U.S. is going to end up isolated and alone, and everybody's going to reject the dollar. And as a result, we are going to, the dollar is going to go down 50, 60, 70%. The stock market's going to crash. And I would just point out that has already happened to Russia. That is exactly what's happened to Russia. Okay, so that's number one. The second thing is that when the bully beats a kid up on the playground, if all of the other kids got together right away and attacked the bully would be done and he'd be gone. And bullies would never exist in the first place.
Exactly.
But that's not what the kids do. More often than not, all the kids who watched the bully beat up the other kid will run up to the big kid and try to be friends with him so that they're not next.
True.
And so, again, I don't necessarily like this, but that's what happens. I mean, that's the real world, right? There's what you read in fairy tales. Every now and then, David comes along and slays Goliath. Everybody loves a good, underdog story. But the reason everybody loves an underdog story is they don't happen very often, right? If they happened all the time, nobody would love those stories. They don't happen very often.
And the slight difference, though, Brent, the slight difference is this isn't the kids running up to the bully. This is the other bully who watched the bully beat up the kid, going to the kid lying on the ground and say, you know what? I can help you. And it's back to your
well, no, but what I'm saying, in my analogy here, the United States is the bully.
No, that's what I'm saying. The United States is the bully. They just beat up the little kid.
Yeah.
But instead of China being over here, another little kid, China's another bully.
That's fair. I mean, they're a bigger kid. That's right. That's right.
So they just looked at it and said, "That's mine now." So they just went up and picked up Russia, dusted him off, and said, "Okay, you're on my team now, and I'll protect you." And it's like mafia families. Yeah. And what we're doing is we're mafiaizing the world
absolutely
into two camps. And I agree with you that there are going to be two camps, and it's not going to be the U.S. isolated and alone. We got plenty of friends, but the thing that people aren't paying attention to, and I think is maybe one of the scariest things that happened recently. And I don't mind it because I don't really care for their ethics, but we cut a deal with Saudi in 1973 or four, and basically we basically said, okay, we will protect you at all costs as long as you denominate oil in dollars. Full stop. Okay.
Yep.
Now, no matter what you do to us, no matter what you do to anybody else, right? You can chop people's hand off. I mean, whatever you want to do, but we will protect you as long as you do that. The fact that now Saudi won't return our call, it's literally like a TikTok thing. I mean, you don't return our call. And now they're making noises saying, well, yeah, we could do a deal with you, China. That is a big deal. I mean,
it is a big deal. It is a big deal. And and again, I think it's important for me to point this out here is that my goal, a lot of people will not believe me when I say this, but my goal is not to be right. My goal is to make money. My clients did not hire me to be a social justice warrior. They did not hire me to be in a think tank and figure out all these things that could possibly happen 15, 20, 30 years from now. They hired me to protect their capital now and in the near to medium term future. They didn't hire me to figure out what's going to happen in 2060. Now, is there a small part of the portfolio that you need to think about what could play out in 2060? Sure. But so my point is if I'm wrong on the milkshake theory, and the dollar goes much lower and all the assets that we own go higher as a result,
I can live with that.
I could live with that. As long as, that's the goal is to make, for me, I'm not, everybody has to decide whether they're trying to change the world or whether they're trying to do their job. I'm trying to do my job. I'm not trying to change the world with the milkshake theory. I'm just trying to explain my thinking. And so I think under any of these scenarios, I think maybe not in the very short term, but over the next couple years, the death of the petrodollar system and the twilight of the dollar, I think sees the dollar go higher before it ultimately crashes. Yeah. And when it goes higher, I want to profit from it. That's it.
Pretty simple.
I've got two kind of closing questions for you here. Just because in general, what we're talking about here, this phrase, the closing of the dollar window, et cetera, this is a direct reference to the U.S. and basically G7 nations' decision to confiscate the assets of Russia, primarily the Russian central bank, right? I think that was really the big wake-up call. It said, wow, of that $650 billion or whatever you have in reserves, we're actually going to take an enormous part of that, right? So the realization there for central banks, governments, whatever, is, these assets that sit in the global financial system, which the U.S. sits over, not really mine, right? And there's a really great thread out there actually by a guy named Punk6529, which is all these other freedoms that everyone thinks they have, the ability to, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, all that is actually predicated on the ability to transact, right? The ability to, if you can't spend any money, good luck talking or aggregating or whatever. You can't do shit if you can't transact, actually. So that's the number one freedom. So it is funny. I've started to rethink about sanctions and financial exclusion. Instead of like taking away the financial system, what if you cut off water? Because it is this fundamental ability to just live and transact and operate in the current world. So my question to you is, now that that's on the table and the US essentially has said to whatever they are, G7 superpower, like, we're cutting off your ability, your water, essentially. Other countries, even allies of the United States, have to be looking at that and being like, this is deeply concerning. So now we've been talking a lot about China, right? China is sitting on over $1 trillion worth of US treasuries. They've been diversifying away and whatever. They're sitting on $1 trillion. Let's say they have ambitions to take Taiwan. Let's say they have ambitions to do something that the US doesn't want to do and they're going to get sanctioned. They have to be looking at that $1 trillion and saying, I need to find an alternative here. This is not going to cut it, because when push comes to shove, it's not mine. This isn't worth as much as I thought. So my question is, do you think that foreign central banks will start thinking that way? And if so, they have to sell the treasuries, right? Am I wrong here? Like, what do you guys think about that line of reasoning?
So I personally think it's logical reasoning, but I don't think it's as big a deal as maybe you think it is. And let me tell you why I think that. I think they are definitely thinking, how the heck do I protect my own money? No question about it, right? The kind of the door's been thrown wide open, and people, it's the real world now. This can be taken from me. But if China were to sell their treasuries, and let's just say they go buy gold, okay, fine. They sell their treasuries, the Fed buys them. It's $1 trillion. We printed how much money, or we bought how many treasuries the Fed bought how many treasuries over the last 3 or 4 years, and the dollar's higher than it was 3 or 4 years ago. So that's not exactly the death of the dollar. Now, is it a good thing? Not necessarily, but it doesn't necessarily. What's that?
Not versus the renminbi.
No, that's true. That's true. So, we'll have to see, if China, that's okay. So this is, Mike, what you're talking about here, it brings up a point that kind of what I was talking about earlier. Just because the U.S. is the bully and will take your money, do you think China is above doing that? You don't think China would take your money? You don't think Putin would take your money?
No, but like,
so where are you going to go?
But that was our whole thing. That was our whole advantage, right? Okay, here's another one.
I agree. I know what you're saying, and I agree. We've kind of cut
strong
off
property
one
laws.
of our advantages.
No, but this goes back to banks. If you put your money in a bank, a regional bank, a commercial bank, a national bank, a central bank, doesn't matter. If it has the word bank, and you put your money in it, it's not your money.
That's right.
It's the bank's money. And you have an IOU. And IOUs, under most circumstances, those IOUs are money good. Yeah. But there is a time, and we just experienced it, if you are a Russian citizen, you're now experienced. If you're a Canadian citizen.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
And you donated to the wrong cause because I can't even talk about it. It makes me Justin Bieber. There we go. Thank you. Justin Bieber. I like that. That's good.
What COVID revealed, and what now the geopolitical stuff between Russia and the United States and Ukraine and China and Saudi Arabia, all of this stuff, I kind of have a little bit of a different take on it, in that everybody talks about how dysfunctional it is now, or how the supply chains have been broken. And how money is, you're gonna have to find alternative ways. You can't just use your ATM card. You can't just go take money out of the bank. So what it's shown me is that it's kind of incredible how efficient the system was. Just think 3 years ago.
Yeah.
You could order something from China. You could be in Miami, order something from China, and it would be on your doorstep 24 hours later. You could do whatever. You could travel anywhere in the world. You could go from the remotest, mountaintop in the Himalayas to Rio de Janeiro in less than 24 hours. Right? And you can't do that anymore. Right? You have to have a pass. You have to have a passport. You have to have a jab. You have to carry some physical money because you might not be able to take it out of the bank.
Papers,
you have to fly.
Please.
You've
gone back to papers, right. Please.
If you're in Russia, you have to fly a Russian airline. You can't fly a Western airline.
This is the idiocy of bad leadership.
I agree with you 100%. We're totally in agreement there.
I do have a last question for you, just about Russia, the financial system in general, because here's something. And again, Brent, we were talking about this, Mark, before you got on here. But one thing I can't understand. Let's rewind the clock 3 months ago. We were talking about 7 rate hikes. That was going to break markets, right? We were going to break markets by raising rates 2% in the United States. We have now essentially caused a default on sovereign bonds for one of the largest economies in the entire world. And somehow, no one is worried that that's going to break anything in the financial system. So why am I more concerned about this than I feel like other people are? Why is a default...
preschool in 1998.
But I know what happened then. But like that, right? That was the last time.
I'm just giving you grief. I mean, 1990. We've seen this movie before. The Russian stock market went down 95%. Russia defaulted on their government debt, and I had investors at the University of North Carolina, where I was the CIO at the time, say, "Oh my God, isn't this a horrible thing? Shouldn't we sell everything because Russia's defaulting?" No, we should actually probably go buy Russian bonds. So this too shall pass. It's a tiny market. It's a tiny market. And it's a tiny amount of money relative. I mean, it's literally a drop of water in a giant pool. And it's important for the people that own those assets. And this is bad leadership. What do you mean I destroyed the assets of the Kentucky Pension Fund by sanctioning the commies? Oh shit, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't want them to lose money.
Yeah.
How do they have like 15% of their assets though in Russian banks?
No,
doesn't that seem like a bit of risk?
Oh,
was it?
1%.
Okay. I thought it was like 15.
13 million out of 80 billion. So
okay.
Again, the media
that seems like
wants you to believe
management
that they were communist sympathizers and the people of Kentucky are bad people. No, they owned an index fund which had Sberbank. This is the thing. Sberbank is the most profitable bank in the world. It's an amazing company. And the idea that somehow, and the guy who runs it is actually anti-Putin, like the most anti-Putin guy out there, but he's allowed to exist because he enabled Putin to become the richest man in the world. By the way, he is and still is the richest man in the world. Even though we've hurt him, he is still the richest man in the world.
The economy of Russia is the size of the economy of Texas or something, so it's on a relative, like Mark said, on a relative basis, it's pretty small. And we've seen this movie before. It's not the first time Russia has defaulted. My guess is that there will be, Russia defaulting is kind of a known, for lack of a better, like you kind of know what that means.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
But I'm sure and we know that Russia will do something back to us, right? There will be some blowback, whether it's commodity prices or energy prices. That's a known unknown or whatever. I'm for the use Rumsfeld terminology, but then there is no doubt those unknown unknowns out there that we just don't know about yet. Yeah. There will be some knock-on effects to this that will cause havocs in the market at some point, and whether that's next week or 6 months from now or a year from now, I don't know, but I'm certain there will be some knock-on effects to this.
Yeah, Michael, the other piece is people relentlessly focus on one side of the balance sheet without thinking about the whole balance sheet. Debt jubilees or debt defaults are common. They're common, right? It was actually, if you go back to ancient Judaism, it was built in every 49 years. Every 49 years, everyone's debt was erased.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Every 49 years. And so what you did is you wanted to borrow as much money right before the Jubilee so that it got dissipated because you could acquire the assets. So think about it. Assets and liabilities have to match. So if your liabilities get cleansed, now you're rich. And so what people forget, this is like, well, we just killed Russia. We hurt the liability side of the balance sheet, but they have a bunch of assets. They have lots of gas and lots of oil, and they're actually selling it now at higher prices and getting new assets. And yes, there's some pain and there's some people that are going to suffer. But it's like when people talk about the US and all the liabilities we have, and we do have lots of liabilities. The entitlement problem is real. But we also have these amazing assets, right? The national park land. Yeah. What's the value of that land? What's the value of Yosemite land? How many trillions? I don't know. It's a big number.
Yeah.
So
like, what's the Vatican worth?
Yeah, no, exactly.
I think that's an interesting question.
There are assets on the other side of the liabilities, and it's like when people in China talk about, oh, they have so much debt. No, think about it. The bank and the state-owned enterprise are two sides of the same coin. 40% of the debt in China could be wiped out tomorrow, literally, because you just cancel both sides. And so they don't have the same debt problem that Japan has, that Europe has, that America has, because we don't have that interconnectedness, but we have assets. And Japan has less assets. Maybe Europe has less assets. One of my favorite lines from Byron Wien. Europe's on its way to becoming a very nice open air museum. And they make some nice cars and machine tools in Germany. But other than that, it's a nice museum.
I have another analogy that I'll leave you guys with, and for all the listeners to think about, and maybe it will help put my view in a little bit more perspective and understand why maybe the dollar might stick around a little bit longer than is perceived, even with the result of the recent actions. And that is, Mike, you're on Twitter. Mark, you're on Twitter. A lot of our friends and colleagues and family members are on Twitter, or they watch YouTube videos or whatever it is. What was it? Over the last year or so, how many friends of yours were either shadow banned or had their accounts terminated or locked up?
Yep.
But yet you're still on Twitter. You still use it. You still go to YouTube. And the reason you do is because everybody else goes there as well. And it's convenient and it's efficient. But you don't have to go to Twitter. There's Getter. There's another place. You can go to, there's other ways to watch videos. You don't have to support those evil companies that have done those horrible things, but you do because that's the network, and that's the power of the network, and that's the power that these corporations have over us. And that's kind of the power that the dollar has over the other currencies. It's not that there's not other ways to do it. There is other ways to do it, but it's not as efficient. It's not as easy, and there's not as many people there. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that.
No, that is the amazing insight that Paul Romer won the Nobel Prize for this, right? The law of increasing returns. It's not the best technology that wins, it's the one that gets critical mass. But the flip side of that is what Brent's talking about, which is once you have the critical mass, once you are the preferred network, it is possible to lose that. And there are lots of examples over history of that, but it takes time. And my only disagreement, it's so funny, you and Brent, you guys just totally disagree. No, we actually don't. And we violently agree with, it ain't about being right or wrong. Yeah. I love when people, they're going back, they search my Twitter stream for 4 years and they say, you said this in 2018 and you were wrong. I'm like, dude, I've changed my mind 7 times since 2018. And it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. It's all about making money. And it's how much money you make when you're right, how much money you lose when you're wrong. Because I'm wrong a lot. Yeah. But I try to minimize the losses. And then you try to make up for it on the other side by making a lot of money. But my point is that this idea that there will be a movement to Getter, right? Like, I have a Getter account, but I haven't gone there as often, to Brent's point, because my network is still on Twitter. But as more people move. And it may not be Getter, it may be something else, maybe a
Yeah.
decentralized version. But networks are really hard to displace. And that's why I'm in violent agreement with Brent's point that the dollar isn't going away tomorrow. And that's the other thing, right? The dollar displaced the pound as world reserve
Pound is
currency.
still here, right?
The pound is still here. It's been here for 374 years. It's just that now the map behind Brent isn't, of the British Empire, so to speak, right? The sun never set in the British Empire. They made a mistake. They invaded Mesopotamia, incurred a bunch of debt. The pound sterling collapsed. The dollar ascended. We had Bretton Woods, and now we are, number one for now. But this transition, the point I was trying to make, back to my point, was that the dollar, I take, not offense, because I like Brent, but I think I don't like, the thing I don't like is when people say the dollar's strong. I'm like, look all around us.
Well,
Versus gold, versus Bitcoin, versus houses, the dollar ain't strong, right? We talked about this last week. Houses do not grow. They do not get better. They actually wear out. What is
Mark,
down is the dollar.
I gotta respond to this. I actually tweeted something out about this a couple weeks ago. If I said Michael Jordan was fast, nobody would come out and say, yeah, but he can't beat Secretariat in a lap around Churchill Downs. It's, if I said a redwood tree is tall, you don't say not versus the Empire State Building. When I say the dollar's strong, it's versus its peers. That's, anyway. Whatever.
No, but that's important. I mean, it's really important to understand perspective, and that's why we should have these conversations, and that's why this is so much fun. And I'm grateful, Michael, for you putting this together. And
thanks, Mike. This is great.
Grateful for you guys for
managing
coming
the
on.
conversation as you all always do so masterfully. So,
All right, guys. With those kind words being said about me, we will wrap it up. Thanks. Thanks, Mark, as always. And Brent, I appreciate you coming on. This was a lot of fun. We'll have to do it again soon.
All right. Have a great weekend, guys.
all right, you too.